If you want to capture real emotional interviews, you have to get deep into someone's psyche. And most of the time, this is a very fine line between unlocking those deep emotional responses and completely going off the rails. Today, I want to talk about 5 interview questions that have a tendency in breaking down those barriers and opening up your subjects to get those really deep emotional responses that give your documentaries dimension. So the first thing that you need to know is that I don't just jump into these questions. It is definitely a good idea to get to know them a little bit better. And one thing that I definitely suggest is do a pre-interview over the phone or even in person if you can. So when you do sit down and you do this interview and you're filming it and you got the lights and the camera, this isn't the first time that you're meeting them. Now, once you feel like you're in a good place in the conversation and you can start to progress, the first question I ask them is, what is their motivation to do the thing that they're doing? If they're a doctor, maybe you want to ask them why they became a doctor. Why, out of all the other professions in the world, did they choose this one thing? What is that motivation to them? And this is an extremely important question because by finding a person's motivation, you unlock what drives them. And you can also start to unlock traumas and tendencies for what made them choose the thing that your character is doing. The second question that I love to ask is, what are the greatest challenges that you're faced with while you're trying to accomplish this thing that you're doing? Every single story needs to have a struggle or an antagonist. Sometimes it's a person, or sometimes it's something that your character is faced with internally, but whatever it is, you need your character to talk about it and describe their relationship to it. Another very important question to ask, and something that you should ask constantly throughout the interview, is how a particular moment or event or even a person made your character feel. Getting to that feeling of that character, because you could ask your subject a million questions and they could answer it very matter of fact. Recently I was doing an interview with a fighter and I asked him, tell me about the fight, kind of like walk me through it. And he's like, well, I trained for 8 weeks, I fought, and I lost. He gave me the facts. It was very matter of fact. But when I started to ask him, how did you feel during that training? What did you feel leading up to that fight? And then when you got into the cage, how did you feel about being there? How did that, that moment make you feel? What kind of emotions, what kind of things were you going through? And then when you lost, how did that make you feel? And as they start to break that down, that's when you're gonna really be able to build this character through your documentary, is when you get into that raw emotion and they're describing their feelings throughout a process. So make sure that as you're going through your list of questions, you're constantly checking in with them and asking them how they felt in that particular situation. And trust me when I tell you, you're gonna be able to build your characters and develop them a lot more in your documentary when you find out how they felt and their emotions throughout their journey. Any good story or documentary has a character that is trying to accomplish something great, something bigger than just themselves. And a great question to ask is, what happens if they succeed? And after they answer that question, I love to follow it up with, what happens if you fail? Now, what this does is that it sets your documentary up for the ability to show a priceless before and after effect that could build anticipation for your story. And if you're telling a good story, then your viewers will be questioning and anticipating what is going to happen next. One of the last questions that I ask on every single interview is, what is your biggest fear? And believe it or not, you learn a lot about someone when you ask them about their biggest fear. Motivation is another question that kind of goes hand in hand with this one, but you'd be surprised that when you ask someone what their greatest fear is, you get a completely different response. And that's why I love it, is because you really force your subject to let their guard down and really start to think about that question. What is their greatest fear? And it could have something to do with your documentary, or it could not. It could just have something to do with who they are as a person. Either way, you're gonna break down this barrier and they're gonna start to really tell you something deep and personal. And that's gonna open up a whole nother door for different directions and places that you can start to take this conversation in. I would like to thank you guys for taking the time and watching this video. I have a really awesome video coming out next week discussing interview angles and how to tell stories with them. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll check you guys out in the next one. Deuces.